This is the In Focus podcast from The Hindu.
Hello and welcome to the Hindu's In Focus podcast. I am Nivedita V. Over the last decade, Make in India has been at the heart of the centre's economic policy. A big part of this has been increasing defense manufacturing. After all, India is one of the largest importers of defense equipment in the world. To change this, the government opened the sector to private players, eased FDI norms, and pushed more domestic manufacturing. The results are showing. India now makes everything from boots to bullets to fighter jets, missiles, and even aircraft carriers. Defense spending has nearly tripled since 2014 and production has crossed 1.5 lakh crore. We are now exporting to 100 countries from Armenia to France and even the US. But here lies the real question. How much of this has actually boosted India's defense preparedness? And what are the policy gaps that still need to be fixed? To help us understand the issues at play, I have with me Dinakar Peri, a fellow in the Security Studies program at Carnegie India and my former colleague here at The Hindu. Thank you so much, Dinakar, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me here. Good to be on the other side now.
Can you please give us an overall insight to what we are making over the years and how the policy has changed through this time?
To begin with, just for some number to start with. So in March, the Defense Ministry announced that India's defense production has reached a total of 1.27 lakh crores for the financial year 23-24, which is almost 174% increase compared to 24-2015, which was at 46,430 crores, roughly about. That's what the numbers have changed in the last, 2014, 2015, that financial year. And this is the number combined with all the public, private, startups, MSMEs, all, the entire combined total together. So that's it. So how has it happened? So one, the ecosystem has changed. Definitely, yes. One is a bit of a policy push. Two, crisis requirements. I mean, there is an increasing need for doing domestic manufacturing because you can't be reliant on someone all the time. That's a serious vulnerability, and especially what we have seen in the last, 4 or 5 years now. 2020 standoff, then the war in Ukraine came in. So there have been back-to-back events, so which in fact, in a way, the earlier push kind of actually helped that. And those circumstances, those crises actually pushed that towards, gave a nudge to that trajectory, what was going on. So, in the way that kind of fused in that sense. So why, just one example, just to say what was happening, or rather trace the trend, in a matter of speaking. So traditionally, as you pointed out, the public sector undertakings were doing the bulk of the manufacturing, mostly, more or less, everything was there, except some low level or, downward manufacturing given out. That, and they were also, in a way, largely with licensed manufacturing. So we started developing our own things, say, for example, missiles. The missile program began a long time back. We did see some phenomenal success over the years in that, and India is regarded as self-reliant as far as in some of the missiles are concerned, especially strategic missiles, which no one will give you. You have to develop on your own. So some areas we have, but then there are so many others where we have kind of gone into licensed manufacturing. But has that really converted into building it on our own at some point? Probably not in all cases. For example, jet engines, fighter aircraft, a few others. It's been a mixed bag. So jet engine still remains a long dream. We spent a lot of money. Now we're trying to do a local manufacturing or a licensed manufacturing of the US engine with GE in India, so that the deal is on. And there's also another engine deal which we want to co-develop an engine with France. That's for our ANCA. Probably we'll come into it, in a matter of detail later. So that's something which it's been a long dream, but still we are going through. But in the sense, fighter jets, yes, we did one, the Marut whale, way back in the 60s and 70s, we had it. And then LCA, we really began the light combat aircraft. We really began indigenous fighter ecosystem. So that kind of, it took long, there were delays, it took a lot of time and cost overruns. But now we're at a phase where India can say, okay, we design and develop a fighter aircraft. And now the whole ecosystem has built, which involves sort of private sector at different levels, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and the really down ones. So in that sense, things have changed, but there's also a long way we have to go. But the point is, there is no other way. You have to, especially, the turbulent times we are in right now. The last, again, if you see 5 years, 7 years, the world has been in a churn, in a flux. And all of this actually has a bearing, because end of the day, military, it boils down to military as the last resort, but also comes to dependencies if you are not ready for the critical systems. So I think I'll just leave there.
So you spoke about the change in 2014. What was the defense manufacturing change that the Indian government brought in, and how successful has it been so far? Are we just assembling products here, or are we actually developing products in India?
The metric, the ballpark 2014, to talk of the policy push given by this government, because it became actually one of the major planks or domestic initiatives. Defense was one of them under the whole Make in India and Atmanirbhar, which eventually transferred into Atmanirbhar initiative. So that said, there have been a lot of push, in the sense incentives rolled out. The industry itself has been opened up. At one point of time, it was tough for the private sector to even reach out to the services or interact with the MOD, on a more open basis to understand what is required, or what they want, how much they want, and what the way they want. It's a mix of both. See, the end of the day, the users, which is the services, they want a product. For that, the industry or whoever is making it, they need to know exactly what is required. So it needs a hand holding or a handshake to be able to get the right product out. It doesn't work in isolation. So it needs a continuous interaction, evolution of things. So in that sense, the ecosystem was opened up. There's more greater, I wouldn't say even now, it's a greater level playing field than it was before, compared to, say, the defense public sector undertakings, DPSUs, and then Ordnance Factory Board, who are also now being converted into DPSUs. So that said, there were also policy in the sense simplifying licenses. For example, there was a whole what was initially called the negative indigenization, negative import list, or redefined as the positive indigenization list. That's also for both services, where it stipulates that, okay, you can't import this from abroad after this point of time. And similarly for the DPSUs, because there's a lot of foreign content in our systems which we make, because there are a lot of systems which are imported. I mean, you don't make them because of the numbers or critical tech, whatever is it, whole range of things. So even for the DPSUs and the other, the companies that were said, okay, in what you make, you can't do this from abroad after this time. So that kind of definitely give incentivize the private sector to get in to make stuff, because it gives them economies of scale. It gives them assured orders, at least to an extent. That is one. Also, in the defense budget, the capital allocation in the defense budget, a certain amount of it in the capital component was reserved for procurement only for the Indian industry, from indigenous sources. That volume of money you can't import from outside of anything. You have to do it here. So in a way, the system of to kind of draw a firm, 2-3 highlights. One, what we were doing, say, previously we used to issue the tender or order to the foreign company. And we say, you type with a company in India, either direct import, or you type with an Indian company and make it here, license manufacture, whatever. Now we say, no. Now the order is given to the Indian company. They go, if they don't have the capability, they scout the market or the global market, find an OEM, they type with them, and they manufacture it here, and they have to stand guarantee for it here. Now the onus is on the Indian company rather than the foreign company as it was before. So how does that how good has that been, or what is the way in that sense, how progress in that? It's been a mixed bag. Again, it has done things, yes. So, but that said, again, you're still continuing to license manufacture. So what was being license manufacturing done by the public sector before is done now by the private sector. So in that way, some things have kind of changed patterns, but still those remain. So now you say co-development. So co-development, I mean, that's something we should understand. We talk about technology transfer. Okay, technology transfer, we keep defining in some percentages. We typically say 50%, 60%, 70%, I've done 80% indigenous content. That's great. But that's where also the fallacy lies, because that 50% is easy. So the external ones, that the other 50% or the 40%, 30%, that's the most critical. We're still importing that. So your fundamental dependency for that system, be it a fighter jet, the engine being the case, or or a radar, some other major system, a tank, anything. Your fundamental, that critical niche tech is still, that 20% is still from outside to a large part in many cases. So that's something now that we have reached a certain level of, say, maturity or a level of ecosystem, manufacturing ecosystem now you have to flip that. It's incrementally, as you go up, it's tougher. It gets tougher to reach the next percentage. So now we have to break that mold. That's where we now have to focus on.
So if I'm getting you right, what is happening right now is that when the government issues a tender for, say, a helicopter, and we are going to buy the helicopter, the Indian Army, the Navy, or the Air Force is going to buy it, whoever is manufacturing it, the foreign guy will have to give about 60-70% defense tech transfer to Indian companies.
There is a defined percentage, at least 50.
Okay.
They normally say at least 50 and then going upwards as per definition. So on that note, see, helicopters, you said that. See, helicopters is one area probably we will not do major imports. I mean, we have had a fairly reasonable, I would say, success developing our own helicopters. The engines are still imported for the helicopters, or rather license manufactured, by HAL with Safran for the helicopters. But the platform per se, to a large part, is actually designed and developed here now, beginning with the advanced light helicopter, then a variants of it, the light combat helicopter, light utility helicopter. But still, we have a few imported, for example, then MH-60, which are the multi-role, which also do significant anti-submarine warfare. So those, we are now inducting them. The Apache is the heavy attack helicopter, which we got from the US. We still have some, coming in. And there are a few others. In fact, the Navy came out with a utility helicopter tender recently, just literally a couple of weeks back, which they have been trying to do for over a decade now, 1.5 decade. In fact, that's again one thing. Your procurement process also kind of meanders through iterations. So that's, it has changed, but it's still cumbersome. It's still tedious. There are, big deals, big ticket priority deals. For example, something like your very short range air defense systems, what's called the MANPADS. It's for the army, in a combat scenario, it's a lifeline. It's the last resort for air defense. That, or anti-tank missiles, these helicopters, for example, they have been critical requirements, but they have been getting delayed for 1.5 decade now, going through iterations. That's also, kind of delays things, then disincentivizes people from coming in. It has its own cycle of things.
So the long delay will ensure that the companies who want to sell don't sell to us, or by the time we come to actually buying it, the technology will be way ahead of what we want. Both are a problem.
Absolutely, both ways. Yes, absolutely spot on. That's actually the case. It's when iterations have been happening. Eventually, you ended up buying, because you can't change the document, the tender document, or the RFP. You have to end up buying the same thing because you couldn't update it, and you shortlisted. What I'm talking is the Visharad. We shortlisted something for a long time. Trials, retrials, and retrials. Eventually, they shortlisted. The company said, "Okay, we are making a better one," but they couldn't bid that because you selected something else. But eventually, that didn't happen. So the army resorted to emergency procurement. So all services got this emergency procurement powers given after the 2016 Uri terror attack and the surgical strikes, where they were given 300 crores and they just can go and buy anything off the shelf. So they actually, many things which have been tested, but they couldn't buy them in the regular process. They actually bought them under this in small volumes. And they went again for repeat order of the same thing.
So that means that there will not be technology transfer for these equipment, if there is supposed to be any in the first place.
Yeah, for the 300 crores, they can't be. It's just outright buy. It's small outright off-the-shelf purchase. So even in that, they're trying to do some amount of, at least, say, a local tie-up under manufacturer kind of a thing, local assembly or something. But that limits your, it becomes ad hoc. You're just buying small volumes instead of, a bulk buy of what you require in numbers and stuff. We actually have a a review of the defense acquisition procedure underway right now. Right? The defense secretary and as a team, as a team is appointed, they're looking into it right now. So we should have the new policy in the next few months, hopefully, which promises to address this particular thing. In fact, particularly of cutting down timelines, and especially after the experience with the Air Force modernization, the delay in the fighter deliveries, etc. They're now trying to, do that. So let's see. We hope that actually works in a positive way.
So before we go ahead, I'd like to understand what exactly we actually make in India then. We make bullets and things. We also make some tanks. We make naval ships. What exactly are we making and how much of that are we making? And how much are we buying of the same?
We have now increasingly making a lot of things. I mean, that's, yes, at different levels. For example, at the startup level, there are startups and MSMEs, which actually are developing, some of them are developing good tech. Some of them, again, have gone out, bought some tech, added something to it, unpitched it. For example, drones is something which is just expanded. There's an explosion. Expansion is an understatement. There's an explosion of companies and offerings. In the last just 3-4 years, when I was watching the space closely, literally every third day you have someone coming and saying, okay, we're making this, we want to test it, or we are offering this, etc., etc. So that's also a problem because there's an explosion. And drones are now going to, in a way, have changed the battle space or battlefield in that sense. What you have seen in the war in Ukraine, how drones have literally changed the dynamics. Small quadcopter, small little, worth a few thousand rupees or a lakh rupees, carrying a small ammunition or a grenade or a explosive, and then taking out frontline platforms. So those swarm drones, those have become actual real threats. So, but then the problem is you're trying to invite the companies. Okay, you're getting it. The point is there's no check. So how do you know? Because most of the components come from China. The batteries come from China. The motor comes from China, and so on. So how effectively we're able to put a check, because there's so much of a deluge of things coming in. So that also becomes a challenge. That actually is something that officials have been talking at different platforms, raising that, saying we need a formal, proper mechanism in place, not just an ad hoc thing, because the purchases are also ad hoc right now. Every unit in the army just goes out and buys something, or maybe different institutions are going and buying off the shelf. So then you can't ensure a certain standard, right? There's no framework. So that also becomes a challenge in that sense. So that's said, drones is one. But then going up the value chain, there are a lot of things now which Indian companies are doing. There have been a series of collaborations which, private sector has gone out, tied up and offering here, and including including the ammunition, what you pointed out. Ammunition is a critical area, which has been a critical area in the, for a very long time. Now that's kind of changing. The ammunition was closed for private sector in the past. Now that has been opened up. Now companies are actually, a whole bunch of companies have come in. They went out, bought the technology, they purchased the technology outright. They're now trying to manufacturing it here. So that's happening as well. So that said, now one important example for a template for going forward will be for example, the ATAGS. ATAGS is the heavy artillery gun, advanced towed artillery gun, which is a 105 mm 52 caliber gun, which actually went through several iterations, jointly developed by DRDO and with two private partners, Bharat Forge on one side and Tata Advanced Systems on the other side. So each one partnered with DRDO. So the good part of that is, for example, traditionally DPSUs have the one which have developed the expertise of doing the high-end things. For example, assembling aircraft, assembling tanks, etc. Because they've been doing it. But at one point, they were the default nominators. They were the ones doing it. They have the expertise. But there were issues with efficiency. The private sector brings in the efficiency, but they still don't have that level of expertise. They're still, scaling up. So that's where you need a hand-holding. You need to merge the two and to leverage both. Or the country will lose out on either one of them. Either you lose the expertise or the efficiency, because you need them today. You need them yesterday, today, tomorrow. And you don't have that long curve of doing it step by step for long. So that you need that combination. It's actually a great example of how things can be done. The ATAGs. In fact, there are now more tenders being thrown open for that in that combination of things. So that's a great evolution going forward. In fact, for example, even the fighter aircraft as well. now they're bringing in more and more private sector to ramp up production. One, to also bring in efficiency and speed up the process and scale up your own the skill and the expertise of your own industry in that process as they go up. That's one. So, and I mean, you talk of ships. The ships actually, see, it's an interesting thing of of how to be done, what can be done. See, India now designs big frontline ships, including aircraft carriers, designs and builds them. But the engines, the float, the move part and the fight part, some of the weapons as well are still more of the sensors actually. They're still imported. So, and that's changing. I mean, some weapons have been coming. So for example, the BrahMos is now on all ships, which is a joint venture, Indian built in that sense. And the MR-SAM, the medium range sophisticated missile, which is again Indian built. So in that sense, so now what the ship building part is great. Now the focus now is on the next steps. So similarly, also when it comes to shipping, for example, you build great ships, but you also have to package better tonnage in terms of firepower. Say per ton of the space, how much firepower do you pack in? So if you compare them, our designs with thing, you can there's space for improvement there. That's again, in fact, as I was told, that's the focus in the next design phase of ships that's going forward. So it's a good thing to know. So it's fun. So broadly, if we want to say missiles, we have been doing quite well originally. I mean, for a long time, ballistic missiles. Now increasingly cruise missiles also. A range of missiles, for your Astra, your air-to-ground munitions, and a whole range of things. There has been a whole lot of indigenous push, both by DRDO and the private sector. And now bringing in the private sector to kind of build them along or manufacture them, not the R&D part. So that's actually going fairly well. A lot of radars, sensors, they actually come up quite well. For example, air defense system performed amazingly well during Op Sindoor. So many of the sensors and radars are actually Indian. Many of them. I wouldn't say, for example, S-400 has its own radars and setup, which came from Russia. But there is an entire indigenous ecosystem around that. That's actually worked great. And in a way, the old legacy air defense guns, for example, which were originally kind of supposed to be phased out, got delayed because of the procurement process, were upgraded, and they actually came handy for to counter the drones. Eventually, it turns out the world realized the air defense guns are the best thing to shoot down drones. They're cheaper. You can't fire a missile at a small drone. You need a big one. You need a proportionate, cost-efficient solution. So air defense guns happen to be that, and we did that. And most of the upgrades were done here in that sense, and you got new ammunition for them. So that also that, and again during the standoff 2020, and when war in Ukraine broke out 2022, because we get stuff from both Russia and Ukraine, significant. So then since you suddenly were caught in a bad shape, and since supply stopped, your regular spare supplies, ammunition stopped. There were delays. So then they literally services reached out to the industry and said, okay, make anything if it is reasonably good, we'll take it. And that actually helped, in both ways. So they actually managed to, at least because of a small little spare, your entire system is not grounded. A helicopter or a aircraft is not grounded. You can, those things can take in ground while you wait for the, say, bigger engine overhaul or the bigger systems to come in. So those things kind of, worked and working still in that manner of speaking.
We spoke about helicopters and Navy. The Indian defense minister some time ago said that India will stop buying naval ships from other parts of the world and will start manufacturing them here in India. How much of a assembly line is it compared to how much are we actually making it here in India?
In fact, see, we will not be importing any more warships from outside. In fact, the last foreign manufactured ship to commission was INS Tamal, the frigate that was commissioned in Russia 2 months back.
Yeah.
That's the last imported warship, fully imported warship. I mean, we might import the radar, some weapons, etc., etc. But the platform per se, as I was, talking about earlier, is all Indian.
So that
we have been doing that for a while.
Sorry to disturb. It will be both the platform and the design, which is Indian, and then we have various parts that go within the huge major component. Might be from other places, but there will still be some importing, which is
that's a process we go through. But the design and development, the Navy has a indigenous in-house Naval Design Bureau set up decades back, and they began with modest offshore petrol vessels. And now they design aircraft carriers and full-fledged 8,000-ton frigates, and they've been doing that. And so that has been there for a while. The ship part of it, that's what the distinction I made. The float is the ship. That we have been doing for a very long time, and we are now doing well. So now the next step is to graduate, fully indigenize the systems and sensors on board, because the ship itself is only so much. You need the power to move and the punch to hit. So those we still have to kind of, it's happening.
It's happening, but it's a work in progress.
On that note, just 2 quick points. So for example, again, now the BrahMos is kind of the designated strike option in a manner of speaking for all the 3 services, because it's present in all 3 services. On aircraft, with the army, fired from the land, or on the ships, fired from onboard ships. And from ship to land also you can fire. So you have BrahMos all over the place. I mean, enough numbers now. So that's the primary strike option, which again, it is actually a great example of how it takes time, but you can do it. So when BrahMos began, there was significant Russian input in that. Well, we did some contribution. So over the years, we actually kind of changed parts on the BrahMos. Now even the seeker on board, which is an important, very, very important component for the missile to hit onto the right target with precision, is Indian. Over the years, you have changed you developed a local one and changed the Russian seeker on board. That has happened. So now BrahMos is, fairly Indian in content, and of course it's manufactured in India. And there are also several other missiles now kind of joining that bandwagon in terms of, short range, long range. You have the Pralay, you have the Prahar, and the whole Pinaka. Pinaka is going to be the, mainstream rocket launcher for the Indian Army for a very long time. I mean, the range is going up as we speak. It started at 45. Today it's at 75-kilometer range. Pinaka, the multi-barrel rocket launch system. And it's going to, in a couple of years, it's going to 120, and the plan is to go to 300, like the HIMARS of the US. What we saw, in Russia, Ukraine being fired across Ukraine, got them from US. So that's, in that sense, that's the trajectory is on. So that has come up in a really, really good way. For example, Akash also. Akash is about 85 to 90% indigenous content. And it has, again, performed fairly well, during Operation Sindoor. It actually was tested in combat.
So another aspect when it comes to defense manufacturing is something you spoke about, the long delays. So the delays not only in the procurement side, but it's also in the manufacturing side. For a long while now, defense manufacturers, public sector defense manufacturers, were taking a very long time to design and manufacture goods that are needed for the Indian military. Has the long delay become shorter?
It's happening, but probably not fast enough. There are still delays. For example, I mean, a bunch of things. Helicopters, aircraft, tanks, they're all examples where there have been, a series of delays. The product has come up better probably than what was envisaged while developing, but that's one. You also need them. You need them today. You're delayed, you're you're hamstrung in terms of availability. So that's a thing. So that's something we need to address and see. As we talk of more and more private sector, increasing the private sector stake, we also need a larger ecosystem, the basic ecosystem in terms of testing facilities, as simple as that. Something testing facilities or a firing range. The private sector does not have access, or now is getting access step by step, but there's still several things which are needed. So for a while, and even now, they take the system abroad to test it and fire it. So for example, not just the private sector, even in general, we aspire to make our own jet engine. We don't have a flying test bed as on date. The testing facilities for aero engine development are still limited in the country. Even recently, a derivative of the Kaveri, the original Kaveri engine meant for the LCA, which was shut down then, a derivative of it for the UCAV, the Unmanned Combat Air Vehicle Program. That had to be flown to Russia again, literally a couple of months back, to be tested on the flying test bed. So those things, you need to build that basic ecosystem as well. That you have to cut down the time and cost, because that also adds time and cost. See, a private sector, a small firm, big companies still have the wherewithal. The small company, the startups don't have that much of wherewithal to, create those, their they build a very, very niche tech at a small level. But the point is, for that to be scaled up quickly, tried, tested, and scaled up, it needs that hand holding, both for them to do that and for the services also to get them quickly. So I think the structural issues, I think we need to kind of, focus as a country, as an ecosystem. We should kind of map them, and something's been announced. Some things have been done, but we need a focused, approach to kind of fix those basic things.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the things that needs to be addressed?
So these, as I said, some of the things, for example, we are giving a level playing field vis-a-vis the DPSUs, but that's limited now to some sectors. For example, recently for the AMCA project, the India's 5th generation fighter aircraft called the AMCA, Advanced Medium Combat Aircraft. So the government gave a notice saying it will be opened up. ADA, the designing agency, gave out a tender saying everyone is open to participate for the program. So that's great. HAL has expertise, it has to be there. So ruling out HAL is not the option because they have the expertise. So bringing in others, building that again, that consortium kind of model will be great. But that also has to now go to other sectors as well. You need to open up at different levels and say, okay, we have to find a model of bringing the public and private together. We need a template now for that. It can't be an ad hoc. Okay, one case you do that, one case you do something else. We need a template and do that. I think that's the best way forward to leverage the expertise, the available pool of talent at the shortest time, because you need both. You can't keep reinventing the wheel.
So my final question to you is this. We know that India is producing more defense equipment than ever before, and some of the defense manufacturing companies, most of them in fact, are making a good profit. What does this mean for our national security and defense preparedness, given that we have a very hostile neighbor and our immediate neighborhood is not very stable?
See, there is no substitute for self-reliance. We have to do that. And especially the critical area. See, some things you don't have to. It just makes more commercial, logical sense to just go and buy a few outside things. But for the core critical tech, you have to do it. There's no, two ways to it. That's one. The other thing is now, say, okay, things have changed. Say, for example, the private sector is doing a lot. But if you see, as of today, most of the private sector, what they do is license manufacture or build subsystems, subcomponents, either in the systems India is procuring or have been now integrated into the global supply chains of the original manufacturing company, OEMs, as they call original equipment manufacturers, or the big companies of the world. They're especially US and France. They're in their supply chains. That's great. But that's one part of it. See, playing supply chain does not give you that access to that critical tech. That you still have to do it here. So now we have to now graduate to that. So for that, the government is investing, the DRDO is spending, or spending for R&D. But the private sector R&D spend is fairly limited even now. What they do is license manufacture, not original TOT development. That's limited, quite limited. Unlike, say, the US, where it's predominantly the private sector which does. So there are other factors, but that's also a factor that we need steps to push that up, because that also has to come in. So it can't just keep, a deal can't just mean that the public money is being paid for a private sector company to acquire technology so that they can manufacture the product. But what after that? What after that? Okay, you get it. How do you improve on that further? Are you able to build the next version of that aircraft or helicopter or something else once you get it? That has to be seen. So anyway, on that, just to kind of, on the end note, we haven't touched upon defense exports. So we are now doing more and more of defense exports. So again, what I said just about below, said a little before, that we're doing a lot of subsystems. So our companies are integrated in supply chains. So all that counts to your defense exports. So when you said defense exports, it need not necessarily be, not all of them be entirely systems. I mean, we have done systems recently. For example, we have exported artillery guns, the Pinaka launchers, a lot of radars. That Armenia is in the top 3 now in the last 2 years, because they got a lot of stuff. So there's a lot of interest in the Middle East. For example, in our Akash systems, the helicopters, ALH, and so on and so forth. There's a lot of interest. And some private companies have come up. For example, your ballistic shields, helmets, all those things. There's a whole entire ecosystem for that, and there is interest. I mean, I keep saying okay, we want to do it from India because we get the quality, it's assured. I mean, it's good to know that. So there is a lot of interest in Middle East, Africa,
Philippines
Southeast Asia. There's
like
a lot of,
BrahMos. They're very
they already bought one.
yeah, they want
No,
to buy
they already
many
bought
cruise
one.
ships.
The
Yeah,
Navy.
yeah,
See, the first order is for the Philippines Marines.
yeah,
Now the Philippines Army has been talking for the BrahMos actually even longer, by the way.
yeah,
They've been talking. The original discussion with Philippines was the army.
yeah,
That got delayed. And the Marines came and concluded the deal and got the systems as well.
yeah.
So that's on, yeah. So there are several countries for the BrahMos. Now there's a lot of interest, as I said, in the BrahMos, Akash, and several other things, which now we are doing, in that sense, yes. So it's a great progress. So in fact, just to put a number to the all what we've been talking. So again, 2023-24 financial year, ending March 24, the defense exports were at 21,000 crores, roughly, multiplied almost 30 times in a decade. And now there are about 100 plus countries. So what I was, again, the point I was making, the top destinations happen to be US, Armenia, and France. Armenia was more recent for the last couple of years because they bought entire systems, as I was describing before. But US and France, they actually get a lot of subsystems. So there you don't actually do systems, but a lot of subsystems, components, which go into the supply chains of those companies. So that's something we probably have to focus on, kind of change that percentage from subsystems to exporting more and more systems. That will be a great effort within the target we have here, because we target to, as the government has announced, the target is 3 lakh crore production in terms of overall defense production and 50,000 crores in exports by 2029-2030. So that's an ambitious target, but while the broader numbers remain, we also need to focus on some this thing and kind of push the value chain now. That will be essential going forward as a country which aspires to build our hardware and also be a great power.
Thank you so much, Dinakar, for joining us today and for giving such an in-depth and a detailed discussion and an idea of what the defense sector is actually producing and where we should go from here.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
In Focus will be back soon with analysis of the biggest news issues. In the meantime, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and other platforms. Just search for In Focus by The Hindu. We'll see you soon.